China says it's sanctioning 11 Americans and in retaliation for sanctions the U.S. imposed on officials of the Chinese central government in Hong Kong and the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region over Hong Kong. Carrie Lam, Hong Kong's chief executive, was among the 11 officials sanctioned by the U.S. over the weekend for allegedly undermining Hong Kong's autonomy in the wake of the new national security law for the region. What's the purpose of these sanctions and what's the impact in practical terms? And will Hong Kong's reputation as a hub for financial stability be undermined? Joining us from Hong Kong is Whitman Huang, a deputy from Hong Kong to the 13th National People's Congress, and in Beijing, Lu Xiang, research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the point. Now, Professor Lu, Hong Kong government denounced the U.S. move as shameless and despicable and a blatant and barbaric interference in China's internal affairs. Now you've got China sanctioning Americans in retaliation. What's the ground for China's announcement, and what's Beijing's criteria in the choice of names?
Yeah, for China, actually, it's a despicable humiliation done by the U.S. side. You know, the Hong Kong affair is purely the Chinese internal affair, and the United States government has no reason to impose any sanction on Hong Kong and the central officials. So now China has announced countermeasures based on our, the criteria is very clear. We don't want to escalate the situation. We just want to give the counter sanction and to let the U.S. side know it's not a good action. We are not sit idle to this kind of sanctions.
Well, to take a closer look at the 11 names, they include Senators Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Pat Toomey, and Representative Chris Smith. They're all Republicans. The list also includes heads of 5 U.S.-based NGOs: Human Rights Watch, the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute of International Affairs, and International Republican Institute. So I guess to Lu Xiang again, why these groups in particular? And it's reported that they've been sanctioned last December already for their role in the unrest which devastated the region since the second half of last year. So why these groups again?
Okay, I saw the list. The first there are 2 groups which are sanctioned by the Chinese government. The first group are those people of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The second group are those people of the so-called NGOs, but actually they are semi-government offices. So those people are the initiator of the sanctions against on the Hong Kong and the central government officials. So now the Chinese government gave countermeasures. So
when you say they're not
these guys,
when you say they're not NGOs, they're part of the U.S. government. What is your evidence?
Okay, some of the agencies they are almost 100% sponsored by the U.S. government or the Congress. So they are semi-government agencies in my mind.
All right. Whitman, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Chris Smith, they're already on Beijing's sanctions list for Xinjiang, for meddling in Xinjiang affairs. Why do you think the sanctions is including them this time again for Hong Kong?
I think there are clear evidence that these people have been involved in, pushing and advocating and helping the descendants and the writers in Hong Kong. I mean, and also basically helping these people to do false propaganda. It's very clear that when we see what they said late last year and even this year, about what's happening in Hong Kong, which is far from the truth. And it's also very clear that some of these opposition leaders have been visiting them in the States. And, I don't know what they really discussed, but at least they seem to be in collusion.
Why the repetition, though? And could Beijing have chosen some other names? Do you also agree with the theory of Mr. Liu that Beijing wants to do something to show its resolve to defend itself, but it does not want to see the situation repeating, the situation escalating?
No,
Whitman,
it
please.
is.
Whitman, please.
Yes, I think I agree with Professor Liu. It seems that we are just doing a pure reciprocal. We're keeping it at the politician and NGO level. We do not touch any of the U.S. government official. And also, I think at the end of the day, in real practice, though, in practical case, this sanction will not have any, much harm compared with what the U.S. is doing to Hong Kong. So it is more of a diplomatic, retaliation instead of a real, aim to harm.
Help us understand the statement. You say it is very different what Beijing is doing to these people or to the U.S. side than vice versa. How much more biting are the U.S. sanctions against the 11 officials in Hong Kong?
Well, stopping visiting visa is one thing, not allowing people to come, which is reciprocal. But then the U.S. Treasury sanction actually involves saying any financial institution cannot do any business with the sanction list, people on the sanction list. Now, due to the hegemony of the U.S., the finance dominance of the U.S. dollar, there may not be, people in Hong Kong may not have any bank accounts with the Citibank, but most of us all have a bank account with HSBC. And unfortunately, HSBC also operates in the United States. So if they are afraid of the Treasury sanctions, they may have to take action. So that is the whole ironic part of it, because the whole global financial system, the U.S. actually still have a very strong hold in it, and they can hurt other people.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it's a double-edged sword. If the U.S. continue to do things like that, people will have second thoughts. They will say, okay, I operate in the U.S. or I go and invest in the U.S. because I believe it was a free country, because there is, protection of my assets. Now, if the U.S. administration, okay, this is not even without any court order, if the administration can by an executive order, sanctioned and decided to, do anything to hurt my, not only my entrance, but also my assets, then people will have second thoughts whether they should still continue to buy U.S. dollar assets and invest in the U.S.
Right. Well, basically, U.S. Politicians, I believe it's Pompeo, right? He was talking about two fundamental rights that need to be protected. One is about religious freedom. The other is about private property. And in this case, it seems that what they're doing is against their own value. Mr. Liu, your thoughts on this and on how biting the Chinese sanctions could be, because China doesn't have this kind of power that the U.S. can wield. Is it really just largely symbolic or substantial to a certain degree as well?
Actually, on the both sides, this kind of sanctions are mostly symbolic. Sanctions is a gesture, it's a posture. It's not something substantial. Those officials on the China side don't have any asset in the U.S., but they might be got impacted on some daily transactions, but that's not important as long as they don't have business in the United States. We know that Hong Kong government has said very clearly the U.S. side sanction is only made by the U.S. government. It has no jurisdiction in Hong Kong or somewhere else. So it's very clear. Yeah. Even if a U.S. company, as long as it's incorporated in Hong Kong, it has no right to do anything against this
Well, I
officials.
think it's, in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that, exactly as Whitman said, because for a bank that is British, for instance, so long as it is part of it in the United States, then it will also be very much afraid. However, in reaction, Luo Huining, director of Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong, said, isn't such a sanction in vain, as I don't have any assets abroad. Of course, I can also send $100 to Mr. Trump for freezing. So, Whitman, for Mr. Hui's case, what's the damage does the U.S. seek to inflict, and is it just intimidation?
It is. I think it's if any intimidation, but if he doesn't fail it, then it's not effective. But unfortunately, for Mr. Law, it's obviously because he's a Chinese official, he's just new to Hong Kong. I give you one example. I just read on the internet one of the I haven't fact checked it, by the way, but this is a notice I saw from one of my WhatsApp groups. AXA, it's a French insurance company, have issued a notice saying, okay, if anybody on the sanction list, then their claims may be affected. Now, I have been paying premium to AXA for the past 30 years. Now, luckily, I'm not on the sanction list today, okay? But if I were, what's going to happen?
Right.
That's the premiums I pay for the past 30 years. The insurance company is one of those things. And then, obviously, I can understand because they have operation in the U.S. and they're caught in the middle. And the Hong Kong Monetary Authority actually yesterday had issued a notice saying any unilateral sanctions by other governments should not, should be considered in a fair basis, and it's definitely not under jurisdiction, the same jurisdiction in Hong Kong. So how does this company is handled between, a rock and a hard place?
Yeah, that's very difficult. Anyway, the technical issues are too much for us to elaborate and debate on. But Mr. Lui, let me ask you this question. Is this what we're going to see in the foreseeable future to come, at least before the elections? U.S., launching sanctions, China retaliating in measured ways, nevertheless?
I don't see many, how to say, I don't see a situation in which U.S. and China will sanction on the other side in the near future. I don't see more cases.
No?
I think the relations have to be stabilized even for.
But what if the United States doesn't want to see the relationship stabilized before November, at least?
But I believe President Trump needs stabilize the relationship.
Yeah, you believe so?
Actually, I believe so.
Okay, Whitman, your guess, briefly.
I cannot guess because he is just totally unpredictable.
Okay.
So anything can happen.
What can China do,
Mr.
Mr. Lui?
It wouldn't get to the worst.
What can China do? Should China take the bite? Yes or no?
For China, we just don't want to escalate the situation in any case. That's our attitude.
Okay.
For the benefit of the two peoples, we will keep calm.
Let's try. Let's see how it works. Many thanks to Whitman Hon and Liu Xiang. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. I'm on Twitter, not on Facebook yet. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.